Saligia, as read by the author, Adam Perry.
Saligia, Chapter 4, Luxuria. Robert Allen entered the shop smart with his brown hair having been whipped into a frenzied mess by the hurricane-force winds outside. He could still feel the freezing air biting at his exposed neck when the double doors closed behind him. He rubbed the dry patch of skin beneath his collar as he passed an old man in a blue vest. "Damn fine job they stuck you with," Robert said to the old man, who stamped his feet and rubbed his hands together in an effort to stay warm. "Welcome to Shop Smart," the old man chuckled, acknowledging the obviousness of Robert's statement. "Damn!" Robert unzipped his jacket, but then changed his mind. "It's as cold in here as it is out there." "Heater's been out for 2 weeks." The old man tossed a couple of pocket hand warmers back and forth between his wrinkled palms. "That's why I keep a supply of these babies." "You'd think a company this size could get the damn heater fixed inside of 2 weeks." "You'd think wrong," grinned the old man. Robert Allen wandered into Shop Smart entirely unsure of why he had come there in the first place. He cruised around to where he thought they might carry his muscle milk protein powder. He had been using the stuff for a little over a year in an effort to boost some muscle mass. He had always been on the lean side, tall and well-proportioned but never cut. As he approached 50, he found it more and more important to feel good about what he saw in the mirror. His livelihood depended on his confidence. He earned a great living working in automotive sales, and the new cars certainly didn't hurt. His most recent acquisition was a fire-red Dodge Charger with black leather interior. He had watched that car from the moment it rolled off the truck, with the grace of a seasoned actress delivering the best line of her life. He remembered everything about opening its door for the first time, the wonderful high that came over him as he slipped into the driver's seat. The car business was perfect for Robert Allen. He enjoyed the pleasure of being surrounded by objects of beauty, and from time to time he got to test drive more than just the cars. It was this angle of the business that Robert loved the most. He had become highly proficient at closing the sale. Single ladies were the easiest, and he'd take one at the drop of a hat, but the married ones, they posed the challenge that stoked his engine. In sales, Robert found the payoff was not always the signature on the line. More often, it was the intricate dance between the parties involved, that subtle back and forth, leading to the climactic moment of closure. Recently, he had worked with a couple trying to get them into a new BMW, a high-end model with all the bells and whistles. It was used, but had less than 30,000 miles on it, practically brand new. He had taken the couple for a ride, as was his custom. He offered the driver's seat to the lady. She was built like a fucking bomb, just like Robert liked them. Tall, lean with blonde hair. She had even shown up in her best power business suit, dragging her all but useless husband along behind her. It had taken Robert less than a week to bed the Amazonian. She was a seriously dominating personality in the sack, one carved from the finest stuff, and who knew it? She had even come prepared with a pair of handcuffs for him, a bottle of lubricant, 3 dildos, and a blindfold. He even managed to get her signature on a new car before 5 o'clock. What am I looking for again? Robert ran his fingers through his hair in an attempt to tame the tangles created by the wind outside. He cruised for a while, taking notice of the scenery. He could not remember ever having been to a shop smart where there were so many beautiful women. Usually it was trolls by the shitload, their greasy hair pulled up in untidy ponytails. They would waddle through the store in those stretch pants that showed every undulating clump of blubber they could squeeze into the damn things. And if it wasn't the stretch pants, it was the shorts cut for a woman 10 times smaller than the rhino wearing them, showing the world the varicose road map that crisscrossed her thighs. Disgusting pigs. But none of these women were here. Here, everywhere he turned, were more and more beautiful women. There were platinum blondes, curly-headed brunettes, redheads, women with short hair, women with long hair, women with no hair. The variety was practically endless. And even stranger, they all worked for ShopSmart. Every woman who passed had a smile for Robert and greeted him with lustful eyes half closed, asking, "May I help you, sir?" Each one sported sharply creased blue vests with the ShopSmart logo emblazoned upon it. He took long glances over each woman he passed with no fear of retribution, since the only other man he had seen had been the old greeter. Then, passing by men's clothing, he saw her. He did a double take as he looked closer at the blonde folding a stack of shirts in front of the men's changing rooms. Robert walked over to her station, his head cocked to one side, staring at her face. "Amy?" "I'm sorry, were you speaking to me?" The woman looked up from her stack of shirts. "It's me, Robert." He smiled, but was taken aback by the complete lack of recognition in her face. "I sold you a car last week, remember?" "I don't own a car," she replied kindly, and returned to folding shirts. "And my name isn't Amy. I think you've confused me with someone else." "Amy," he leaned closer, "we had sex for half an afternoon before you bought that car. You can't tell me you don't remember that." "Sir, if I had gotten laid any time recently, I'm pretty sure I would remember it." The woman swept the shirts aside to focus her attention on Robert. "I've been single for as long as I can remember, and working doubles in this place just as long, so I'm sorry, but I haven't bought a car or had sex with you because I've been here." Robert stepped back from the counter. Surely he hadn't been that forgettable. And he felt absolutely certain that the woman who had called herself Amy had worked in some big money law firm. He couldn't remember the name, but she had had no trouble with the financing. Then he noticed the scar. Right there on top of her left hand was a jagged brown tear from the middle knuckle to her wrist. "You are Amy," he stated flatly and pointed at her hand. "I know how you got that scar. You told me, after you unfastened me from your handcuffs, that you didn't like to be handcuffed anymore because one time a sharp edge on the cuff had ripped open your hand while some guy was trying to get them off of you. And that," he held up her hand to her face, "is the scar." Feeling triumphant in the fact that he was returning to terra firma, Robert released her hand and took a step back. However, the woman did not respond. In fact, for several seconds she said nothing at all as she looked down at Robert's waist. Her eyes were wide open, as was her mouth. She stared agape as Robert glanced down. He had always been hung. Some people are just in the proper line when the gear is handed out, and Robert Allen had obviously been right up front. The jeans he found himself wearing hugged his crotch perfectly, cradling his bulk. "Holy shit," the woman said, paying no mind to what Robert had been saying. "Excuse me for saying so, but that has to be the biggest package I've ever seen." "Funny." Robert leaned against the counter. "That's the same thing you said to me the first time we were alone." Robert watched a small bead of sweat trickle down her neck as she forced herself to look away from his crotch. She glanced left, then right. Without warning, she grabbed her purse from under the counter, took his hand, and led him down a short hallway past a series of identical changing rooms. She walked backwards, never breaking eye contact, until she came to the final door on her left. She pushed him through the door and shut it, then slid the lock shaft into place. She slammed him against the wall and dropped her purse to the ground. "I've got to see it," she exclaimed as she worked at Robert's belt, followed by the button fly on his jeans. Robert's heart pounded in his chest as she pulled out his manhood. It took only a matter of seconds for him to reach full erection. The touch of her fingers and the wetness of her mouth drove him to the heights of ecstasy. He tore at the buttons on his shirt like an animal. They snapped and popped in every direction as he ripped the shirt from his back and grabbed her hair in his fists. She cuffed both of his wrists, then put his hands over his head and hung the chain on a clothing hook. "This is fucking crazy," Robert muttered as he looked up at the handcuffs, then back at the woman. She kissed his cheek, then withdrew a roll of duct tape from her purse. She began to slowly tape his hands together in a ball around the hook. Licking his neck as she went, the woman continued to tape strips across Robert's entire body until he was taped to the wall. When she had finished, Only his face and his cock were left exposed. "Don't you think this is going to be a tad uncomfortable to get off?" Robert glanced down at the strands of gray tape that held him to the wall. "You talk too much." She drew a final piece of tape firmly across his mouth and patted it down. She reached into her purse once more and removed a ponytail holder. She wrapped her hair into a neat bun and tied it off with a quick couple of loops. Robert Allen hung suspended against the wall and could only stare at the woman in front of him. He tried to speak, but the only sounds he could make were muffled grunts behind the tape. Slowly, the woman rubbed the back of her neck, then raised her index finger that was dripping blood. "Shh," she said with her finger raised in the universal command for silence, then smeared the blood across the tape which covered his mouth. Robert's eyes widened in fear as she took a moment to admire her handiwork. Then she winked at him and opened the latch to the door. "I'll be right back," she smiled, "then we can get started." She blew him a kiss, and as she turned, Robert saw the gaping bloody wound exposed near the top of her neck. It dripped gore down the back of her blue vest, along with small chunks of meat held together by coagulated blood. He began to scream inside the changing room, fighting to be heard behind the tape. He bucked and struggled against the hold of the tape, but made very little headway. The fear, which should have killed his erection, drove it harder and harder. It throbbed painfully now, exposed in the middle of this gray wad of tape. He could feel every frantic beat of his heart thump out its fear in 12.5-inch surges of blood. He could hear the woman on the other side of the door, but couldn't tell what she was doing. It became more and more difficult to focus on anything short of the escalating pain. Slender fingers appeared at the top of the door and eased it open. To Robert's horror, the fingers began to shrink. The skin tightened and shriveled around the bone. A ring that had been on her left hand slipped off, rolled across the floor, and stopped below his suspended feet. A shriveling foot appeared underneath the doorway. The probing digits atop the door eased it open. "Now," said the woman. Her voice had dropped several octaves into a guttural croaking noise. "Where were we?" What stepped into the changing room was a grotesque caricature of the woman who had stepped out only moments before. Her skin had become beef jerky, wrapped around a dead tree limb. All of her beautiful lines were replaced by sharp, unnatural edges. Her body had been perverted into such an abomination that Robert's cock should have leapt off his body, twitched on the floor, and quickly died. However, it swelled even more as the veins engorged with blood. His screams went unnoticed by the being which had bent over in front of him and placed its hands against the mirror on the far wall so it could stare back into Robert's panicked eyes. A foul smell of acrid vinegar and rot assaulted his already overloaded senses. Then, with a terrible grunt, it pushed itself back onto Robert's cock with a grinding motion. Robert had the sensation of having slipped his shaft into a tightened glove packed with crushed glass and salt. Writhing in pain against the unending torture, he caught a glimpse of the woman's smile in the mirror. Her lips parted to reveal the blackened, rotted teeth of the dead. She removed one hand from the mirror and slammed the changing room door closed. Thanks for listening to Saligia. For more information, please follow me on Instagram at Adam Perry Writing or check out the website at adamperrywriting.com.